Well, you could make an argument that anxiety is a price that you pay for having ambition, because the very mere fact that you're able to conceptualize tomorrow and what is yet to come causes a mild state of anxiety.
I like that. Say that again, actually. If you can remember it.
I'm going to have to
Whoa, we're going to have to rewind this. Yo, do we have a producer in the studio today, bro?
Ah, bro, you got me laughing, man. I'm going to have to calm down now, man. Really, when I get the fucking giggles, bro, it takes me time.
It takes you time to kind of,
get my composure, man. People are going to be tuning in like, why is this guy so happy?
Yeah, why is he so happy talking about men's mental health, bro? Why are they happy?
Men's mental health, why is my man so happy?
Yeah. You're part of the problem, laughing.
Literally.
All right.
But yeah, bro, episode 2, let's go.
Let's go, man. Come on.
Jeez.
Let's go.
I'm happy to have you back in, bro.
Thanks, man.
To have you back in, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, this episode, obviously, I wanted us just to play around with it a little bit, but I know talking about men's mental health is something that is definitely important to yourself, important to me, and I think just seeing where this conversation can go, what we can learn from it, what other people might be able to learn from it, will be, well in tune with the whole reason why we're doing this stuff in the first place. So, yeah, man, let's get it. I'm gonna let you fire away with the questions again.
Sure.
Sure. We can kind of just go from there.
I think one of the biggest questions that a lot of people ask is why men's mental health is often ignored or not taken seriously.
Oh, yeah, I mean, a lot of things get ignored, but men's mental health seems to get overshadowed by other things. I wouldn't say it gets ignored. A lot of people do talk about it. There's more and more people kind of voicing their concerns about it, both male and female. So I wouldn't say it outright gets completely ignored. But it does get overshadowed by a lot of things. Like there's a lot of comparisons made. As soon as a guy starts talking about his mental health, it seems like there's a lot of like shiny objects and a lot of distractions that can kind of take the focus away from the true essence of the pain that person is actually enduring. But why it gets ignored, we're part of the problem. Like men don't really feel comfortable being open and vulnerable about I don't want to say the weakest part of ourselves, but like if you feel like your mental health deteriorating is a sign of weakness, of course you're not going to want to sit there and talk about it. You know what I mean? But that's a stigma that you've embodied. So then it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? People aren't talking about it. You know you should talk about it, but you're choosing not to. So it's like a vicious cycle where you're not talking about it, nobody else is. No one really knows why we're avoiding a conversation at this point. It's just something that we know we don't really feel comfortable sharing. I think some people do, but it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot out of you as well, because, like I said, depending on what your experience of mental health has actually been, it can be really, really difficult to make sense of all of your experiences. But yeah, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I think one of the reasons why, we often don't talk about it as much as we should is probably because of traditional gender roles. So society has certain expectations from men.
Absolutely.
Be strong, be self-reliant, be stoic, right? The moment you show any sign of vulnerability, be a warrior, right?
All of that nonsense.
All of that, right? And that has been since the beginning of time, right? Since we were living in villages, right? You have to be strong.
The relevance and the importance of that message, absolutely. But I think sometimes it can be misinterpreted. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, sort of like, if you show any sign of vulnerability or weakness, then, people just don't take you as seriously. You're not manly enough. People would even say things such as man up. Man up. I've never heard anyone say woman up, That's not anything I've ever heard before. But people will say man up. And I think this in itself inherently discourages men from wanting to speak up about it at all. So if you feel any sort of way, if you're feeling funny inside, because what is mental health is the question that I ask myself all the time, just to make sure that I'm on brand, that I fully understand this. Mental health is to do with the mind. So it starts from the mind. So if you're experiencing anything off the mind or anything that has to do with the mind, but you can't talk about it because people are going to ask you to man up, then you shut up.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I don't know why people even say that. What does that even mean, man up?
Yeah.
I suppose it's somebody just saying, like, I want you to, like, grow up here, basically. But I'm like, even that, like, what does that even mean? Like, where do these sayings even come from?
Yeah.
Do you ever, like, hear some shit?
Yeah.
Like, where the fuck did
Does
that
man
saying
up
even... Like, where did that even come from? Like, what does it even mean to man up or to grow up here? It's like, if you... Like, at the end of the day, if you're a man, you understand that the fact that you are a man doesn't negate from the fact that you're still a human being, right? And as a human being, you have a wide array or a wide spectrum of emotions that you're able to experience. And I think if you're experiencing a certain emotion and it's overwhelming, it's like, fuck it, it is what it is. It's an emotion. You're a human being. You can feel an emotion. You can express the emotion. If people's response to you expressing yourself or expressing a specific emotion just because you're human is, oh, you need to man up, or oh, you need to grow up. I think that's where the problem occurs, because then you don't really know what to do with your emotions. So I think a lot of the times when you see like very toxic traits in men, it's because they've been suppressing their emotions for so long that it still has to go somewhere. So it just explodes. It goes somewhere where it probably didn't have to.
There needed to have been an outlet, but that outlet was never there. So it just compounded and compounded and compounded till it got to a point where when it does get released and explodes, it gets exploded in the wrong fashion. It typically tends to take the sort of like the version of like aggression. And that's why when you do talk about men's mental health, because you have to think about coping mechanisms as well. When men can't talk about things, they have to find other ways to cope with the problem. And we tend to turn to substance misuse, whether that's alcohol or, drugs. When you're doing alcohol and you're drinking alcohol and taking drugs, it doesn't pan out well, because then you become really, really aggressive. And guess who you get aggressive towards? Women and children. You're not going to be aggressive towards another man that you know fully well can probably handle you. Right. So you put that towards women. And so there is, by that happening in itself, there's a negative stigma there already when it even comes to men's mental health. Another thing to probably consider as well is just a lack of education around the topic with men.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, and you would know this because, you're going down that path. You're the sort of guy that actually really educates yourself on this topic to such an extent that I don't think a lot of men do. You take time out of your day just to look at this topic, because you want to be an authority. You want to be able to speak on it. But I think the lack of education is a massive problem.
Yeah, and to be honest, my curiosity towards it isn't necessarily that I want to be the person who knows everything about it. It's more just so that I build my self-awareness up to a point where I'm like, I understand why I'm saying and doing certain things, because it frustrates me when I say something or I do something and I don't actually have a reasonable, logical, justifiable explanation for why I've done it. So that's where my curiosity lies, really. I'm more interested in just understanding why I say and do things on a deeper level, because there's repercussions to everything that you say and do, right? So I want to understand why I say or do it. But the importance is, like, you come across certain bits of information. So, for example, I was having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about the difference between anger and rage. And I was like, well, is it not the same thing? Because it sounds like the same thing. It seems like the same thing. But then I was like, oh shit, it's not. Because when you're angry, anger is like a very healthy thing to express, as long as it's, relatively constructive in the way that it's portrayed. Because you're expressing your discontentment for something, right? And I think that's important. But rage is uncontrollable.
Yeah.
It's driven by such a high level of energy and passion that you can't actually contain yourself anymore. And you lose sight of like the first, second, third, and fourth order consequences of your every move. Because at that point, you don't necessarily have the ability to rationalize your every move. It's almost like you lose all control. And that's the difference between anger and rage. So, but imagine as a boy, you don't learn the difference and you kind of just merge them together. One day you get angry and then you're like, it transcends into rage. And by that point, everyone's looking at you like you've done something horrible, you've done something terrible. And maybe you have. But really what you've done is you've just failed to educate yourself on the difference between anger and rage, because one can be utilized in a very healthy manner and the other does harm to yourself and oftentimes it does harm to others. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very rare you'll see somebody in full flight rage and think, yeah, they're gonna help themselves here and other people.
Yeah.
In most cases, what happens is something really stupid where somebody else is hurt physically, mentally, emotionally, or the person themselves, So that was something that I looked at and I thought, wow, there's like a genuine difference there.
Yeah.
And the counterpart to it is if you are angry and you feel like you can't express it, like as a man, will that lead to you feeling like less of a man? Probably at some point it will. You know what I mean? If you feel like you can't express anger, it's one emotion that you're probably going to experience on a regular basis at some point in your life, because, everything isn't always going to go your way. There's going to be things out of your control. There's going to be people who, will manipulate you, will frustrate you and antagonize you. So you're going to experience anger, but if you feel like you can't express it in a constructive way, because you either don't know how to, or the people around you don't understand that you're just expressing that emotion and you're not in a full flight sense of rage, it's a problem, bro. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
100%. And I think even before we move on to the next question, just kind of going back to the first one, why is men's mental health not talked about as much? I think another thing to consider as well is that historically speaking, women's mental health has been in the forefront of our society, because a lot of women's mental health has to actually do with, their hormones, reproductive hormones, if you want to put it that way, which basically means that with the changes in chemical imbalances in the body, in the female body, there's more tendencies to notice the disparity between when you're at the height of an emotion or not. And so this has been medically studied over the last couple of years. So of course, women we're getting a lot of attention when it came to this. But men don't go through as many changes. We don't go through as many maybe chemical balances or imbalances in our bodies. So we're not actually being as studied as much. So, but that ties in nicely to the next question, which is basically what can be done to break that stigma around mental health. And if I may lead the way with this particular question, I would probably say just a better understanding around the topic by creating platforms where we can educate ourselves as men. For you starting this podcast, Brothers of Purpose, which I'm now a big fan of, you've created a platform where you can openly discuss this. And I think that part of the reasons why men's mental health is actually even being talked about at all in the last 10 to 15 years is because of men that have taken a stand and gone forward to start talking about this issue. And we have a lot of people to thank for that, whether it's the Joe Rogans or the Stephen Bartlett, all these men that have actually stood in the gap to say, look, listen, this is not being addressed enough. Let's talk about it. Do you know what I mean? So that question there is very, very important. Like, what can be done to break that stigma? I think we're doing that now, but
Well, yeah, like, the stats and the facts around men's mental health are like staggering.
Yeah.
Especially suicide rate. Like that's the one that like I find crazy.
Yeah.
Like men's suicide rate is like insane. It's something that, you know.
Do you know why that is?
I think when you get to that point where you're having like suicidal ideations, I'm saying when you get to that point, like everybody experiences it.
Yeah.
Hopefully most people don't, but unfortunately the harsh reality is a lot of people
Like
do.
1 in 4, 1 in 5 people,
Yeah,
or something
you know
ridiculous
what I
like
mean?
that. It's an insane number.
Yeah, I think when you get to that point where you're having these suicidal ideations, you might try and disclose some of that information to like the people around you. Now, if I'm a female, if I'm a woman, I'm probably gonna have, you know, somebody in my circle or in my network who is gonna be a listening ear. You know what I mean? Not always. It's not like something that you can guarantee at all. You know what I mean? But the likelihood or the probability that as a woman, you know, that you can share these things with at least like 1 or 2 people around you. The likelihood, the probability is a little bit higher in comparison to if you are a man, you know, because not everyone has a dad, not everyone has a brother, not everyone has an uncle, not everyone has a friend. You know, so you'd like to hope, you'd like to think that everybody does. I don't mean this in literal terms, because you might have a dad, but you might not have frequent communication with your dad. You might not have that rapport, that relationship, that bond, that connection. You might have a friend, you might have a brother or an uncle, but again, you might not have that connection, that rapport, that bond. So it's like it begs the question: well, how do you facilitate that connection, that bond, and strengthen it to the degree where you feel so comfortable being open, honest, and vulnerable with these individuals? Well, then you do a full circle, don't you? You come back to the whole stigma around men's mental health. And by the time you're having these suicidal ideations, it's too late. You can't just click your fingers and change the whole stigma about the entire industry. Like, it's too late. You're already thinking this way. You're already feeling this way. It would be great if you could click your fingers and just press pause. And all of a sudden, in that specific moment, everything everybody's thought about or considered about mental health goes in the drain, and their focus is just on you and just listening to you and just hearing you and just considering exactly how it is you're feeling. That would be an ideal thing. But unfortunately, bro, it doesn't happen. It doesn't always happen. You can't guarantee for that to happen. And, you know, that's where I think, you know, people get stuck. They look at these statistics surrounding men's, you know, suicidal rates, and I think they look at it and they can't really make sense of it. But at the heart of it, I think it's more to do with that. It's more to do with the fact that by the time you're already having these type of thoughts, bro, it's too late, man. You can't change the industry when you're having those thoughts. You know in the back of your mind, some people understand it, some people don't. Some people get it, some people won't. So it's too late. You're already having these thoughts, you're already thinking and feeling that way. So you're fucked. You're like, fuck, I got to do this by myself. I have to figure this out. And it's a trap. You're circled in, you're cornered in. You don't know, do I go left, right, up, down? It's like, you don't know what to do, bro. So what do? You just top yourself. You just top yourself because you're like, well, I can't change the way people see this thing, this one particular thing overnight, but I've still got the burden of dealing with it. So I'm just going to call it a day. And that's why people are literally, bodies are just dropping everywhere, bro, because they're cornered in. And it's too late by that point. The conversation happens once that person is gone. You know?
You know, it's one thing to talk about like men's mental health not being discussed as much, or what can be done to sort of like, you know, create more awareness around it. But I'm actually even also curious about like, how do we get there in the first place? Obviously, I understand that everyone goes through, you know, a substantial amount of stress in life. Mental illness in itself can be categorized or factored into quite a number of things. It could be genetic, it could be, you talked about this last week on episode 1. It could even be, environmental factors. It's not just one or two things that causes mental illness. It can be a combination of many, many things, or it could just be even that it's in the family, so it will happen to you eventually. But I'm very curious to kind of understand what leads men to fall into that path in the first place, where they're depressed, they're anxious. And I think maybe if we understand that, then we could start having more conversations around maybe creating a checklist that prevents you from getting that far. Because what you've just said about how you go that far,
it's too late.
But it makes me understand that there is, there are stages. You don't just get there overnight.
Exactly.
So if you're more aware, which again, you talked about this last week, if you're more self-aware about where you are on maybe this scale, if neurodiversity has a scale, everything has a scale nowadays. Maybe let's create a scale for mental health so that you can check yourself and go, fuck, I'm 50% there. So I need to start having conversations with my bros. I need to start having, conversation with better help or whatever the fuck. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
How do we get there in the first place? What do you think it is?
Honestly, it has to start with self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Because when you know yourself, you understand yourself, by definition, you're saying you know and understand the world around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as within, as without, right? So how I'm thinking and feeling internally, maybe not immediately, but at some point it's going to be reflected in my perception of my reality, right? So why do I start with self-awareness? Because if I know myself and I understand myself, then the external factors that I cannot control, I let them go, and I look at what I can control or influence in regards to me as a human being, as a spiritual entity, whatever. But I look at what I can control and influence in regards to me, because we'll have cognitive biases. We'll have delusions. You can be driven by power, influence, fear. You can be emotional. You can be too sensitive. You can be distracted. You can be too focused. So your experience as a man is very, very multifaceted. So you have to just be able to be like, okay, let's look at all these external factors that exist in society and just put them on pause for a second, just to pretend that they don't exist and it's just me. And that's step one. A lot of people struggle with step one because, bro, as soon as you have to look inward, that's scary for some people because they might not like what they see. And it's a lot of uncertainty. You're like, I don't know about this. I'm unsure about that. And then it's like, well, if I want to understand myself better, there is an element of psychoeducation that comes into it as well, because you can say I know myself, but sometimes you ever spoke to somebody and felt like they know you better than you know yourself. Of course, it happens all of the time, right? Because sometimes you'll be speaking to somebody who is extremely competent in that specific field, such as psychology or philosophy. So they almost tell you things about yourself that you didn't even know existed. But not everyone wants to have a conversation with a psychologist or a therapist or a psychiatrist or a philosopher or these type of individuals. They feel a little bit disconnected, which is a shame. I would like to hope that's not something that happens too frequently, but it does happen, bro. Sometimes people don't speak to therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists or the right people at the right time because they just feel a complete disconnect with said individuals. But self-awareness is so powerful, bro, because if you were like on the edge, if you were suicidal, it's like, how do you backtrack from that? Like, how do you like come back from that mentality? Well, the brutal truth is some people simply never will, because a mental illness is a mental illness. Like if your brain is like, I don't know what the official term would be, but like if it's just neurochemically set up to just fuck you over to the extent where the writing, the reading, the journaling, the meditation, all of that shit doesn't work. Talking doesn't work. It's tough. It's tough because then every day feels like you're one day away from doing something real stupid. And you feel like you have such a small sense of control over that. So it can be really difficult in that sense. But it's a very hard one to explore in all honesty, because some people really do just avoid these conversations because they just feel like they won't resonate with the people that they're speaking to in regards to it. And like I say, I think that's a shame. And I think that's where we all have a moral duty. It's not a moral duty that everybody is willing to take on board. But at least myself, I can't speak for everyone, but I believe I've got a moral duty to myself and the men around me to let them know, look, I ain't Jesus Christ. I can't solve all your problems for you, bro. But like, I'm here to listen. I'm here to hear you out. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, if you have demons, I'm not oblivious to the idea that I can also be dealing with my own demons, and sometimes they can get the better of me. So if yours are getting the better of you, then if there's anything that I can see or do to help the situation, I'm all for it. And that's a moral obligation that I feel like I have. And not to sound cringe, but I think the world would probably be a better place if more people felt like they had that as a moral obligation.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Well, I think even having the moral obligation to sort of like feeling that they need to treat everyone nicely and kindly.
Yeah.
You know, like that thing of like, I'm going through my own tribulations in life, but I have this moral obligation to just treat everyone like I'd like myself to be treated, because you don't know what anyone is going through. And sometimes the way you address people can kind of like massively trigger them, especially if they're already over the edge.
Absolutely, bro. But it's so difficult because people as men, and women do this as well, I suppose. But like, you know, when you got like a dark sense of humor, and your relationship with the people around you thrives on that, bro, that makes things even more complicated.
Fact.
Because now my man's coming in after a hard day, and you're like, you got any PMs in mind? Yeah, man up, you'd have gone, what you doing?
Man
Do
up.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like,
mental health and mental illness is really difficult to be around if you have a sense of humor.
bro, it's
Do you know what I mean?
you
Like,
know.
because on the one hand, because I get it, like, so certain men will try and be funny about one of the ways that men deal with things is just by bursting each other's balls.
Listen, when you are going through it, and you're really, really going through it, like to the point where you don't even know if you're able to smile the next day.
Yeah. You're really going through it.
That is tough.
Dark times, bro.
It's tough, and I know some people are dealing with that. You know, I've been in that position myself at stages in my life. But when you're dealing with that, bro, it doesn't matter how much dark sense of humor you have. You need a little bit of reassurance that people still know that the shit you're dealing with
is real.
Is some real shit.
Yeah.
You know
I think it boils down to the person, the people that are around you having that hypersensitivity to knowing that, okay, this is not the time to joke around. This guy needs help. Let's offer help. Yeah.
Which is, I suppose, a prerequisite for that is that person's self-awareness. Because they have to look at themselves and be like, what I said there, was it like the right timing? And
But also, even before like you say the thing, it's kind of like when you encounter your friends. Like if my friend calls me on the phone now and says, "Hey, Daps, I'm going through it," I'll try not to make a joke because it's very rare for men to pick up the phone to make that phone call in the first place.
Yeah.
So if they're making that first phone call, I'm not thinking about the first punchline that I'm going to say to try and get a giggle out of them, because if men don't make that call, is the point of this conversation. If men made that call more often, then it'll be more understanding. But men are actually not just even making that call in the first place. So if your boy calls you, you're listening to episode 2 of Brothers of Peppers. If any of your boys calls you and says, "My guy, I'm down, I'm bad," stop what you're doing, get in your car and drive there before he says anything else. And I've been in that position before with my friends. I've got phone calls that made me cry because I had the voice of my friend on the phone and they basically just said, "Daps, I'm not feeling great." And it made me cry because I realized that if I don't stop what I'm doing right now and head over there and be there for them, I don't want to be in a position where I lose this person to maybe what could have been a minute thing that they were going through that maybe it's just tipped them that much over the edge. Because sometimes it's not even really that much. It might just even be the smallest thing that they could have easily addressed. And this could be the meaning, this could be the difference between life and death. Do you see what I'm saying?
Literally, bro. And imagine if this is where it's like you've got to choose your company so carefully.
Oh, yeah.
Because like
your company could kill you.
Exactly, bro. Your company could kill you. Imagine you're at the end of your tether, like you're thinking the worst of the worst. And you call one of your bros and he's like, "Oh yeah, mate, are you growing a vagina or what, mate?" Like, it literally is gonna make you think that everything that is on your mind in that moment, everything that is going through your head is less valid than what it actually appears to be. And that is sometimes what can tip you over the edge, because then you're like, "Oh shit, what if they're right?"
Yeah.
And your demons can be so persuasive.
Yeah.
If you're already thinking and feeling that way, bro, it ain't that hard for your demons to win and be like,
"Yeah,
he's right."
Your intrusive thoughts might just win,
Yeah, your intrusive thoughts may win and be like, "He's right."
Yeah.
You're being soft, you're being weak, you're being this, you're being that.
Yeah. But I mean, more negatively, like if it wins in the sense that, like, yeah, you are soft, so kill yourself, or you are. Do you know what I mean? And so that's very dangerous.
That's how dangerous it can be. So it's like, I think that's why I was saying earlier. It comes back to just being mindful that that moral obligation to just listen, to hear the other person, to try and put yourself in their shoes, to time things correctly, because even if somebody was on the edge, and you've spent half an hour, or however long talking to them, what if it would help the situation to add some levity to it, So it's so delicate the way you navigate that conversation, that if you don't feel it's a moral obligation to be there for people in that way, you'll butcher it.
Yeah.
You'll butcher that type of conversation. You'll fuck it all up. And you don't actually know what the consequences of fucking up a conversation like that actually are,
Yeah.
You might not, that person might not die from it, but it could also like change the course of who they are, who they become.
Yeah.
Which sometimes, bro, can be just as bad,
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been times where I've been going through some shit, and people that you admire, people that you respect, people that you believe you have a strong relationship with, say the wrong things at the wrong time, bro, it eats away at you massively.
Mm-hmm.
You're not dead, but you feel dead inside, because you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
Like that was like probably what I wasn't like expecting, but almost to the extent where you're like, if you're already like vulnerable as fuck in that moment,
yeah,
it can be enough, like to really change the course of your beliefs, so much so that you do more detriment to the situation or to yourself. And yeah, this is what a lot of guys are dealing with, bro. This is what a lot of guys are dealing with. And
I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm also going to try and draw your attention to a post that I saw on social media today. What do you think? I'll start with a question. So what do you think the number one cause of depression is today in our modern society?
The number one cause of depression. It would be very difficult to give that a single answer. And I'm going to sound like I'm just saying it for the sake of it, but honestly, it really is complex, bro.
So if you had to break it down to like just say 2 or 3 things that you think is the main reason why.
I think comparison is a big factor, because if you don't know how unique you are, you will always look at how unique other people are, but not how unique you are. And that seems trivial, right? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal to recognize how unique you are. But at the end of the day, if you don't recognize how unique you are, you can only ever be a carbon copy or a reflection of something else, which then subconsciously devalues or invalidates your mere existence. So it's actually really deep, but it seems very trivial. It's like, oh, don't compare. It's like, no, mate. Do not fucking compare yourself to nothing or no one, and appreciate how unique you are, because if you do not do that, you devalue the essence of your existence. And that is a whole different fucking conversation when you're having a suicidal ideation, because you can't even see what you bring. You can't even see what you are. So it's a very, very different conversation if you're already thinking and feeling depressed. You know what I'm saying? So,
and what's the one tool that massively amplifies that today?
I would definitely say social media
100%.
does not help.
Facts, bro.
You know what I mean? It doesn't help.
It
doesn't help.
So that's one thing, comparison. Right. So what's another one?
Absolutely, definitely comparison.
100%.
But I'm trying to think, if we're saying like just depression and not like mental health
and anxiety as well, actually.
And anxiety. So I think with anxiety, it's because anxiety can really take a hold over someone massively. I've seen it take a hold over people who are genuinely for outside looking in, these are individuals who seem unstoppable.
They seem to have the mental fortitude.
Yeah. Because anxiety is a weird one, bro, right? Because if you think about like the mood spectrum, when you're experiencing anxiety, it's like almost like a nervous, anxious feeling about something that hasn't happened yet. But the fact that your brain has almost got a slight bias towards thinking about tomorrow or something that exists not in the present moment but is yet to come, also is a bit of an indicator of how your brain is functioning.
It feels like it's a lack of confidence. And if it feels like it's a lack of confidence in the present. Because the best way that I've had it like explained to me is, and I know like a lot of experts that are listening to this podcast are going to come from me, but the way it's been explained to me is depression is worrying about the past, sort of. So if you're depressed, you're mostly thinking a lot about what's happened in the past, and that worries you so much to the point where you can actually focus on the present. But if you're anxious, you're worrying about the future to the point where, again, you can't focus on the present. There's a reason why there's a saying, live in the moment, because no matter what's going on in your head or whatever, no matter what's going on in your life, it's hard to put things aside. But if you actually manage to do that, it will allow you to see the present more clearly. If you can see the present more clearly, it can allow you actually shape your future. There's no need to now worry about something that's happened that's, now in the past. But I understand it because there's trauma. And trauma tends to live in the past.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have ongoing trauma, but most trauma lives in the past, because if you're still sort of like thinking about the things that's happened to you, I can get that. But, it's kind of like finding that perfect balance of understanding that, okay, this has happened. this is the person I now am. How can I take those experiences and allow it to just slowly rebuild myself? Because it's not going to happen overnight. Do you know what I'm saying? But I think that anxiety is a big one, because it's like you're sat there, you're laying there in bed, just rotting away, thinking about flipping out. Before I even say my next point, I think one of the biggest cause of depression and anxiety today anxiety mostly, is probably financial pressure.
Yeah.
Financial pressure is a huge one. Many countries are going through recessions. In our society today, it's becoming more and more and more a thing where women can't date you if you're not financially strong, right? But that's a very big issue, because as a man, what's one of the things that we seek and we desire is to have companionship with a woman as well. It's one of the things that we're designed here, upon earth to do, is to procreate, is to have kids and populate the earth. But if you can't even date because there's such a high pressure as to the amount of money you need to have in your bank account, that makes you anxious. And sometimes when you're anxious, it inhibits you from doing some of the things you need to do.
Well, you could make an argument that anxiety is a price that you pay for having ambition, because the very mere fact that you're able to conceptualize tomorrow and what is yet to come causes a mild state of anxiety.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. And you can't guarantee that this and this outcome is going to manifest.
I like that. Say that again, actually.
So the very fact...
No, anxiety. Anxiety is that what you just said there was beautiful, man. If you can remember it.
I'm going to have to...
Whoa, we're going to have to rewind this. Yo, do we have a producer in the studio today, bro? But no, that was beautiful, the way you said that.
But yeah, but the top and bottom of it is the price that you pay for being able to conceptualize what is to come is a mild state of anxiety in the present moment. Because if I'm ambitious or I have aspirations, I'm basically using the right hemisphere of my brain to imagine a reality that is not yet in front of me.
Yeah.
So it's something that is almost like a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it drives you forward. You're like, oh, I have what I have, but I want this. But then the fact that you want that is a desire, and a desire is a clear indicator that something is missing. So it's almost like, it's a bit of a catch-22, right? Because the fact that you want something different, the fact that you want something different than what you have is a good thing, because it shows that you're aware of the fact that you can have more and do more and become more.
Yeah.
But it also can very easily distract you from all that you already have, which then means there's a little bit less gratitude, there's a little bit less presence.
Yeah.
When I say presence, I just mean it's more difficult for you to be happy and content with the position that you're in the present moment. And yeah, it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. So those are like two things. I think those financial pressures with anxiety as well. I think, like you rightly said, it's okay to forward think, but it's not okay to get down on worrying about things that are yet to come. Like, it's okay to think about the future, but not to the point where it holds you back from living in the present. And I think, like, in my experience anyway, some of the times that I've had a mild case of anxiety, it's been me worrying about, right, how am I going to pay my next couple of bills over the next few months? Like, how am I going to like sustain my business, my company? You worry about whether or not you're still going to be, operating as a company in 3 or 4 years, or even in the next year or two. Do you know what I'm saying? So those are the kind of things that makes you worry. And as a man...
But it's necessary. It's a mild state of anxiety. If you're not worried, you should be worried.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let me draw your attention then to the post that I saw on social media. And I think you're actually going to like this one, Michael. So WorldStar released this post earlier today that says, study reportedly reveals that allegedly the number one reason for depression in young males is lack of cute blonde girls. What are your thoughts on this?
Study reportedly reveals that allegedly the number one reason for depression.
Yeah, number one reason
is lack of. It's a bit vague.
Yeah. So I tried to actually chase this article on their website. I couldn't find it. I think it's nonsense. I don't think it's true, but I think it's funny as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible, that the number one reason for depression in young males? And by the way, if this is true, it would only apply to the Americas. It would only apply to the US of A, right? This couldn't ever be a problem that I think would apply to the UK. Could you imagine if that actually is the reason why men are depressed?
I mean,
could you imagine?
Yeah, it's a funny one because obviously it's things like this with social media, right? There's a lot of fake news. Like that statement in itself makes a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
You know
The
what I
comments
mean?
are killing me though. The comment section, like someone said, those vanillas. And then one white girl said, "Well, fun to be around." But yeah, I just thought someone said Brazilians do it better. But yeah, so but yeah, like you said, social media plays a role because so let's assume that there's someone in the admin team of Worldstar that thinks this is a funny joke. I get the joke, but I can also see how this in itself could easily be misinformation because if this is not true at all, then there will be people that lack the brevity of understanding the level of how social media plays. There's a 14-year-old that reads this now and thinks, oh, fair enough. That's what I need. I need a blondie in my life. And that's not necessarily maybe true. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you that question as to why everyone can be depressed. It can happen to absolutely anyone. We're obviously discussing men today, and that's what the sole purpose of this podcast is. But it's like, isn't it funny that we're talking about what leads men to be depressed? And then one of the biggest social media blogs in the world has come up with what could possibly be a false post. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
It all ties back into like how seriously the topic in itself is taken, because obviously when we talk about depression, yeah, it can be quite trivial, it can be quite theatrical, but then it could also be like you've lost your best mate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you've lost your dad, your uncle, your brother, and it's not as funny when you put it that way.
Yeah.
But it is easy to see why these companies and organizations do what they do in terms of how they market themselves and how they talk about the topic. Because social media, like at the end of the day, we all do some shit.
Do you think social media is still social? But do you think it's more polarizing?
I think it's an experiment. It's an experiment. Social media.
A social experiment.
Yeah, at its core, it's a social experiment gone wild, right? Because how we used to communicate, in comparison to how we communicate now, there's not much difference other than the fact that it's very easy to misinterpret how somebody is thinking and feeling based on the mask that they're wearing online. Because, it is easy for you to create an image for yourself online and portray that image. But it's almost just as easy to hide certain parts of yourself, and you kind of lose yourself when you have a fabricated, manufactured image that you're portraying, but you're also putting all this time and effort in to hide parts of yourself, because then it's kind of like what we were talking about the other day. Like there's a lot of effort and energy that goes into doing all this sort of stuff, like maintaining any image, to be honest. But maintaining one that's like fabricated, maintaining one that's like manufactured, bro, it's hard.
It's like being in a TV show for the rest of your life.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah.
And I think everyone does it at some point or in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now I'm starting to understand more and more as time passes the importance of authenticity and, being yourself, doing your own thing, being true to who you believe you are. And it all sounds really cringy, innit? But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of power in knowing all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you do, it's really clear to see why authenticity is so empowering. It's you giving yourself an opportunity to live up to whatever you believe is your core values, and you can gain a lot from that, because it's almost like it's like creating a kingdom around you. It's like, okay, right, this is what stays in, and this is what I integrate into my life, and this is what I embody. And anything that's outside of that kingdom, nothing to do with me.
Yeah. It's one thing about social media is that, like, well, people are very impressionable. It doesn't matter what age you are. You know, it used to be, you know, what was it? What did they used to say? Trying to be like the Joneses, or what did they used to say?
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses. Well, that was in real life. So you saw your next door neighbor, you wanted to be like them. So now it's social media, but because you don't have to leave your house, you can just be on your phone all day, and there are so many Joneses on there, you know. But the Joneses come in different categories. You've got your millionaires, and then your billion. There's so you can't keep up with them. You can't physically keep up with some people. You can't mentally keep up with some people. You can't, you know what I mean? So it just makes it's kind of like those devices in the palm of our hands also, you know, are a huge factor as to why we are even having this conversation in the first place. Is that, like you said at the start of the podcast, comparison is the biggest thing, right? Like you compare yourself. You want to be. You and I were laughing about the most ridiculous thing before we started the podcast today. I might not go into it in detail, but it was just so funny to me because you saw a quality in me that you emulated, but I've also seen a quality in you that I emulate, right? The negative side of that is a quality that we're envious of from each other. Emulation is better than envy, right? But, you know, in tying this all up and bringing the podcast to a close, you know, there's a brilliant question here, Michael. Well, there are two questions. We're going to wrap up the podcast with these two questions. And one of them is, could being open about vulnerability be the solution to men's mental health crisis? So talking about it more, do you think that solves the problem?
Absolutely, because, well, I don't think it solves the problem. Obviously, to say one thing will solve the whole problem is probably a little bit naive. But I think it's a huge part of it, because one thing that you never want to underestimate is representation. So whenever a very dominant masculine figure within, like, I want to say maybe like the entertainment industry, maybe the fighting industry, maybe I would say. But I suppose it could be any industry, really. But put it this way, whenever somebody who's really like dominant or very masculine, very looked up to, very admired by a lot of men, starts talking about his struggles and what he's been through and what he's been dealing with, what people don't realize is that's representation. Subconsciously, not consciously, but subconsciously, you find it quite difficult to associate that person's level of success with the things you're battling. If you do your research and you do your due diligence, you'll always come to realize that people are just people and everyone's fighting something, everyone's dealing with something. But for a lot of people, what they see is what they believe, right? So if that person never comes out and talks about these things, never makes themselves vulnerable, or is like completely honest and transparent about what is happening to them, what they're dealing with, doesn't do a lot for representation, because people start to think that it's just them going through all this shit. And it has the opposite effect when they do come out and talk about it, because they're like, oh shit, this person deals with that as well. Oh shit, this person has this problem as well, and is fighting their demons in that way. And yeah, I think eventually it'll get to a point where the more individuals who come out and say this and do this, it does eventually get to a point where there's no anomalies anymore. So we'll get to a point where everybody's level of awareness, everyone's consciousness and mindfulness is on on a higher plane in regards to men's mental health, because everyone understands that every fucker's dealing with it. And
Do you think that's when robots take over, when they put the chips in our brains? And then you just press factory reset. And everybody
Well,
just is on the same level playing field.
you could say that about any problem in the world, right?
Because getting to that point would be incredibly hard. To the point where everyone is so self-aware to understanding that this is a problem that we all have. Because you would think that it would have taken all these years to be here by now. But I guess we're just trying to scratch the surface with even these conversations about men's mental health, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes in life, it's not about finding a perfect solution to a problem. It's just making sure that you're not adding to the problem.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that you have to accept. Sometimes you can't give a perfect solution straight away to a problem that has existed for a very long period of time. But you can make a conscious effort to make sure that you're not contributing towards the problem and continuing to manifest in ways that is very intolerable for, you know, the vast majority of people. You know, so conversations like this, just discussing it, talking about it, it doesn't solve the problem directly, but it helps kind of like remedy what certain people might be going through in some sense, because they might hear it, listen to it, and think, oh yeah, I can like relate to those kind of like experiences or that way of thinking, or I've felt that way before. And fundamentally, as human beings, that's what we need sometimes, just to be at peace with the idea that although I cannot solve this problem indefinitely, I can tolerate it. And I think I heard a really good quote, but I'm probably gonna butcher it. But it goes something like, men can tolerate almost anything in every circumstance as long as they see that there's meaning and purpose there. So I've absolutely butchered the quote, but that's the core message behind the quote. It's just the fact that if you see the meaning and purpose in what you're having to endure, you can tolerate almost everything, but you don't see the meaning and you don't see the purpose when no one's talking about it, because the only person talking about it in that scenario is you. And if you've already got your demons that you're dealing with, then unfortunately, it's a very uncomfortable conversation that you're having with yourself, just you versus you. So yeah, I think people can tolerate their circumstances much more easier if the conversation stays active, the conversation about mental health stays live, and people continue to discuss it. And it's not about fucking being soft and all that shit. Like, I think when people try too hard to be tough, man, it's not every day be tough, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes just understand that, like, as much as you believe you are who you are, and you say I am this, I am that, we all die the same way, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We all die the same way. So if it's serving you to believe that you're invincible, great, good for you. If it's serving you to believe that you're unstoppable, good, great for you. But the harsh reality is you go out the same way that everybody else does in some sense. And that's why it's so important that whilst you're here, you acknowledge that you are still, to some degree, a reflection of other people. And it is what it is. What people go through is an experience that you can also endure. And you might not endure it, but if you could just be willing to understand or try to understand what people are going through, it's helpful to do that. It's useful to do that, and much more useful than you'd ever be able to give it credit for.
And with that, folks, We've come to the end of the podcast. Michael, would you like to close this one out?
Yeah, man. I was gonna end on one thing, bro,
Sure.
which is I was just gonna ask you if you were dealing with mental health and you felt like there was nothing you could do about it and there was nothing that anyone could say, what would you do to help somebody else who also felt the same way?
So am I recovered? Am I feeling better now? So is this based on my experiences from the past, or am I still going through it and I'm supposed to help somebody else?
Well, imagine a scenario where you felt that level
Okay.
of hopelessness, despair. What would you say to somebody else who could also experience that? Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's just the harsh reality
Yeah.
of what's actually going on. Like we can
Sugarcoat it, right?
we can sugarcoat it and talk about
What would I say?
preventative measures all day long, but at the end of the day, I think it would be interesting to hear what you would actually say to somebody who was at that point, but also why you would say it. Because everyone's different. I have an idea in my mind as to what I'd probably say in regards to it, but it'd be interesting to hear what you would say. Because it comes back to what we were saying earlier about that could be the only conversation somebody needed to hear. It could be the only thing somebody needed to hear.
Listen, man, I think, look, I'm going to go back to what I understand best when it comes to this sort of things. I was raised Christian. I'm a man that believes in a greater power. I believe in God. And I think for me, when I've been in my darker times in life, I've just sort of held on to the belief that there's someone there that understands it all, maybe a little bit more than me. And, you know, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not Christian or Muslim or whatever religion you are, I want you to understand that it's not necessarily a message of religion. It's more a message of understanding that there are things that sometimes are incredible for us as human beings to understand.
Yeah. There's forces in play that you cannot
understand,
conceive or perceive, and those forces, you know, to some degree they live within you. And
or are external as well.
Yeah.
You know, and to whatever degree you want to take that thought, to whatever degree you want to believe in that thought, I think using that to kind of like guide you to know that everything will be okay, because first and foremost, you're not experiencing something that no one else has not ever been through. You're not experiencing something that somebody else isn't currently experiencing. And whilst you're on this journey of life, there's a reason why you're still here, basically. There's a reason why you're still alive. And until the lights go out, whatever that reason is, you know, I'm going to tie this back to episode 1, purpose. It's like finding that purpose, finding that why, because you're still here. The fact that you're down and you're able to actually think about what do I need to get out of this position right now means that there's still something inside of you that's burning to find this purpose, this beauty in life. Life in itself is quite a, you know, I would probably describe life as an experience that's just, you know, it's very difficult to conceptualize in full. Life just comes at you in multiple ways that you're not really prepared for. Yeah, your parents will prepare you for so much. You know, if you're religious, the religious leaders will prepare you for so much. People will try and prepare you for life, but life is really you. What do you think about the things, the choices that you're making, the decisions that you're making? And so if you're down and bad and you're at that level and you're wondering, what do I need to know? Like, what sort of advice or encouragement do I need right now? That means you're also capable of understanding that there's a reason why you're still here now. And right in this very moment, there's a reason why you're here. And that reason has to be your duty of care to now chase and understand and become in full. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Going back to that greater power, whether you believe in God or not, for me, it's always been going back to God and just saying, look, I have no idea what this is. I'm fed up. If today was my last day, if this very hour is my last, I'm ready. I'm done with this. I'm tired of this, right? Whenever I've been at that point where I'm just tired of life, I go back to God and I just ask for his guidance. I ask for his direction. But that's what I know. That's what I believe. And I think that that's one of the initial reasons that religion was very important in our societies and in our cultures, was because human beings, when they're left on their own to try and fathom what life is, it's just too complex. They needed something. They needed to put something in place that made it easier for them to understand the whole point of it, the whole reason why we're here. And that's what religion does really, really well. There's a thing that there's an idea that I've been paying attention to a lot very recently, and it's the idea of post-secularity or post-secularism. Post-secularism basically means that after a point where people basically didn't believe in God for a long time because they were termed enlightened, now came a period where people are now running back to God. So people used to believe in God a long time ago. They had to believe in God, right? Because they saw miracles or whatever they saw. They believed that it was easier to believe in God, right? And then there was an era where we started to have a bunch of men and women that were termed to be more, they call themselves, whether you call themselves philosophers or psychologists and so on and so forth. And they said, well, God isn't real, right? And then so for a period of time, people said, well, God isn't real. I'll do whatever I want. But there's always a time of pain and darkness where you really start to think, I don't know what's real or not. So maybe it's better for me to actually believe in something, whether it's myself or a greater power, because that would align me towards a purpose. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I guess in conclusion, my message to a person who's, not feeling as great, who's in their dark times right now, is the fact that you're listening to the sound of our voice, or the fact that you're thinking or seeking help. That's amazing. That, one, that means you're still alive. You're not dead. So you're alive. And then two, that means you now have the opportunity to understand that there's a reason. The reason why you're here is because you're still special. You're still important. There's still a reason why. You're not done yet. Whatever that why is, find it, make it make sense to you, and make it be the reason why you can then pass that energy on to everybody else. Because ultimately, like Michael said, we will all die. And if you're feeling really bad today and eventually you're going to die, imagine a life where you've turned your weakness or your pain to strength and helped so many other people going through the same thing. So at least when you die, you would have left a legacy behind of a man that massively helped the masses. There's a reason why we still talk about Jesus Christ till this day. It was a man that literally, well, I won't say literally, I wasn't there, but a man that, it was written about him that he gave his life for other people. That's what made Jesus special, is the fact that he gave his life for somebody else. Right, for other people. Some of the greatest people in the world, where it might not seem like they physically left something behind, they've left text behind. We still read Marcus Aurelius today. Whilst he didn't give his life for the next man, he left his thoughts for the next man. And so Marcus Aurelius is still helping the man today to be stoic by what he left behind. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So if you're still there right now, you're listening to this podcast, it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't matter what's happened in the past. It doesn't matter what's happening right now. You're meant to be here right in this moment. And that word of encouragement to you is find out who you truly are, what you're really meant to do, help people. Helping people will help you even more as well.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's just a difficult thing, really, man. Pain ain't easy to experience. I think, everybody fucks with pleasure more. Pleasure it's just fun. Feels good.
Yeah.
But pain is hard.
Yeah. I mean, one can give birth to the other.
Yeah.
In some sense, but yeah, I think it's the key message to take away from that is if you be of service to others, and you be of service to yourself, then there's nothing that can take away from the sense of meaning and purpose that your life actually has. So sometimes I suppose you just have to pick one and run with it. And if you lose sight of both, then just remind yourself that the fact that you exist is still important to someone, and it's important nonetheless, because I'm biased in the sense that I believe every human being brings something to the world.
I agree with you with that statement. Yeah.
I'm biased in believing that, but I genuinely believe that because we do, and sometimes we look for all these reasons and justifications for validating our existence, but there really is no need for any validation of your existence. The mere fact that you exist is acknowledging that you are human, and being human is a miracle in itself. If you look at what we can do and you look at what we have done, it's a miracle to some sense, or to some degree. So just believe in that part of yourself. Just believe in the fact that you do have an inherent value that nobody can take away, regardless of what you have or haven't achieved, or regardless of what you do have or don't have. And there will be some people who disagree with this message. There will be some people who don't understand this message, or they're confused by it. And I suppose that is their competitive nature, but really understand that you don't need to compete with anyone when it comes to the idea of you being worth what you believe you're worth, regardless of who you are, where you come from, or what you're doing. It's really a conversation between yourself and a higher power. Whether that higher power lives within you or it's externalized is irrelevant. It's a conversation that is a very private one, but just understand that at the end of the day, you are who you are, and that's enough. Yeah.
You are who you are. That's enough. It's going to come out in a t-shirt form on the website soon. So but that's it, guys. I guess, that's been episode 2. Yeah, thank you guys for listening and watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all the socials. We also want to hear from you. So coming into episode 3, we want to hear your thoughts on the podcast. You're enjoying it, leave comments in the comment section below and so on and so forth. But otherwise, peace, love.
Love, man.